Hello, I'm Ron Jetter. This is the ninth part of my 9-part series on grief. Today I wanted to talk about grief and trauma, about complicated grief. Most grief is like the common cold. Everybody has some grief sometime in their life. They may not acknowledge it the same way, but everyone will experience some kind of death of someone close to them or loss. It's inevitable. Every year there are 2.5 billion deaths, and that means probably between 10 and 20 million people are grieving the loss of someone in any given year. Like the cold, as I say, it's pretty common and you just get over it. It gets over by itself. Every so often there are complications. There are things that make grief much harder to resolve. And as I say this, I want to give one caution. My work in the church and in hospice, as well as the volunteer work I've done in critical incident stress management, also like PSTD response, fire chaplain, has brought me into contact with people in any number of situations, but I am not a licensed counselor. If anything I say today leads you to somehow assess that you have complicated grief and that you would like to be happier, I encourage you to seek a licensed counselor, and if possible, one who specializes in grief and ideally has known grief and loss personally as well. That would give them that full-rounded set of skills able to offer you the best support and therapeutic skills that will allow you to then improve. I do not offer that. Again, I am not a counselor. One of the things that I have been involved in is called the Critical Incident Stress Foundation, part of the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation of Baltimore, Maryland. We have trainings, we have a local response team, and our team of people who are trained respond by helping first responders. First responders, whether they be doctors or nurses or others in the emergency department setting, the people who operate the ambulances, emergency medical technicians, firefighters, police, all of these are going to run into trauma. Most of it they're able to brush off. Trauma is part of what they have signed up for. It's what they do, it's what they're good at. Every so often, though, there will be that one that's different, and it's labeled as a critical incident. Critical because somehow they're not able to bounce back. They find themselves with symptoms, and the symptoms include cognitive, that is to say, affecting our thinking, physical symptoms, relationships can be affected by it. Functional, are we able to then concentrate on our job to return to the work that we've been called to do? And spiritual, are we questioning deep-seated beliefs because of this critical incident? Our critical incident stress team would meet with groups of people and help them to debrief. And during the debriefing, we help to identify ways in which they can then process this critical incident and ideally then return to that fire engine, that patrol car, that emergency department, that ambulance, as soon as possible. But that if they have ongoing symptoms, they continue to find that they're second guessing or hesitating, they find themselves sleeping too little or too much, they find themselves questioning what they believe, what is right and wrong. They find themselves unable to concentrate on the important tasks of their job. If these things are not resolving themselves in a reasonable amount of time, a matter of days or a week or two, then they are encouraged to seek professional counseling in order to move past it, in order to restore their ability to do their job. For all of us, though, a grief can become complicated in a number of ways. For instance, if a loss is just on top of one too many losses, then it may be the one that broke the camel's back, and this is the one that finally drives us over the edge. What is a loss? Well, let me read a list of losses. And some of these might seem very ordinary and typical, but some of them you might then think, okay, they're in that category that's more likely to be a critical loss, a critical incident, the one that is going to then cause me complicated grief. The suicide of a loved one, the death of a spouse, death of a child, death of a sibling, death of a parent, death of a close friend, a divorce or separation of parents, loss of employment, loss of a cherished possession or heirloom, retirement, financial difficulties, legal difficulties, civil or criminal or both, crime victimization, victimization of sexual abuse or sexual assault, witnessing a violent or traumatic incident, getting unexpectedly poor grades, rejection by a college or prospective employer, loss of physical functioning due to age or poor health or injury or disease, physical or emotional or verbal abuse, loss of a cherished pet. You might think, I've experienced a number of these, and they've been something I've been able to get over. Some of the others, though, no doubt on that list, are the kind that can be very, very difficult, very hard. Some of the things that make grief complicated, if a death seems to involve an injustice, that is to say, it was just wrong, it should never have happened, there was negligence involved, or there was abuse of some kind involved, or there may have been an actual violent crime involved. The suddenness of a death, that is to say, it was unexpected, can cause that grief to become complicated. Dysfunctions within families can cause grief to become complicated. Addictions to alcohol and drugs can make grief very complicated. It may be that someone who has managed an addiction or is medicated for a mental behavior somehow then relapses. They stop taking the medication, they start again with alcohol or drugs because of a death. And that then brings the larger family cycle into the whole complicated grief process, and it becomes very tangled. Complicated grief then is, in a word, entangled grief. It has many components. It's not so much personal as interpersonal, involving family systems more often than not. It affects other people. If I lose a job, it affects people who rely on me to provide that financial stability for the family. If I lose a function of my body because of injury, or perhaps someone injured in the war, that means not only do I have to adapt, but those around me have to adapt. Not only do we lose what we've lost, we lose the potential for other things as well. We lose the potential for all the ways the future could have been different. That's why complicated grief oftentimes requires a professional to untangle it piece by piece, to find all of the pieces. One of the things we recommend when we're working with first responders after a critical incident is that they resist the urge to somehow rely on those things that are not good for us. If a person regularly has a beer or two, we're not recommending they stop, because that might add stress. But to suddenly exchange a beer for a six-pack or two a night, not a good idea. Eating, drinking, smoking, excessive sugar or fat, nicotine, any of these things that can become addicting for our bodies can make it harder for us to physically adjust to grief, because grief requires adjustment from all parts of our being: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, social, financial, maybe legal even. Sometimes people have found peace by making a cause out of their grief and their loss. For instance, here in Washington State, a 8-year-old child died because there was no car seat law requiring him to be in a car seat. Now we have Andre's Law. The mother put her effort into getting legislation so that it's required for parents to have a child in a car seat up to a certain age and a certain weight. Mothers Against Drunk Driving, another good example of how to take one's personal rage at what was so wrong and put it into action. Complicated grief often has as its core that sense that this should never have happened. That's part of what we have to then rebuild, and why it often takes professional help to rebuild a sense of what is my worldview. My worldview has been wrong. I thought it operated this way, and it doesn't. If you recall, I shared back in session 1, my worldview collapsed when I was 12, because that's when my next door neighbor died at the age of 8 of leukemia. Children don't die. They certainly don't die before their parents. They don't die horribly. All of those myths were shattered, and I had to build a new reality as a preteen based on the knowledge that I was mortal, I could die horribly, and that there really was no right or wrong, fair or unfair, when it came to diseases like leukemia. 2 years later, when a neighbor whom I admired took his own life, it further caused me to reevaluate what was life. That's what life is. Life is a series of grief and loss. And mostly we get over it and we function just fine. If you're not, find someone to talk to. Preferably someone capable, and again, as I say, a licensed professional is always a good choice. Thank you.